finally time to watch some Tamon-kun's B-side, my favorite new anime. Wait, what? Wait, no. Let's hear that one more time. Okay. We need to talk about this. As a fangirl myself, Tamon-kun's B-side is so interesting to me purely because it uniquely and accurately reflects the hidden politics of fangirl culture that we don't really talk about and we will just kind of quietly go along with as expected. So today we're going to dive deep into those politics, break down exactly what they are, and then also talk about what this reveals to us about fangirl culture more broadly. And don't worry, there's not going to be any spoilers from the manga. I think I only go up to episode 3 in my analysis because look, I respect the game. I don't want any spoilers either. Let's start by breaking down exactly what those politics are. The best evidence of the way fangirls of face or eyes view themselves are two metaphors that Utage brings up in episodes 1 and 3 and are actually the main reasons as to why I wanted to write this essay in the first place because they're so interesting to me. Firstly, she says, the fans are like rings that orbit round and round the stars. They're like countless particles. And in episode 3, she says, I want to be a trampoline. I want to exist as the mechanism that catapults them to stardom. What's evident from both of these metaphors is that there's a distance that Utage has internalized. She has to, but more importantly, should maintain as a fan of Face and specifically Tamon-kun. And what I think is the most interesting part of all of this is that Utage really understands her position within a wider system that is built purely for furthering the band's success. Like, she literally describes herself as an object, as a trampoline, a mechanism, and as part of countless particles. I don't think it gets clearer than that. From this, it's clear that in relation to Face, whether that's through self-esteem or her understanding as part of the system, she doesn't view herself as a person, but she also doesn't view them as people either. The central struggle of the show is Utage and Tamon-kun's relationship and whether or not they'll cross that invisible line going from idol and fan to boyfriend and girlfriend or something more romantic and intimate. And the tension obviously comes from the fact that they both want to cross that line at least some of the time, but they are both acutely aware of the specific roles that they have to play within this wider system that leads to Face's success. Tamon-kun is God is a phrase that Utage says throughout the show and is pretty emblematic of this system. Like, not only does Utage view Tamon-kun as so far removed from reality that he's a god, but she also makes it her mission to get Gloomy Haruka to say this to himself, not just for his self-esteem issues, but also for the sake of the rest of the eyes too. Like, I think we all know by now that the boy band formula is built off of creating parasocial relationships with fans that draw them further into a fantasy. Usually this fantasy is of your bias, or here Oshi, wanting all of your attention and the idea of being chosen as a fangirl from, as Utage puts it, countless particles. Sweet Magic, which is the opening song, is literally evidence of this alone. They even say in the lyrics, crash, 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 a special kind of relationship. Tying it all back though, Face's boy band structure is not just set up for the fans though. It's also a mirroring of the fangirl politics, which then plays into this parasocial relationship setup even more, and I'll explain what I mean by that now. So one of the anime's central plot points for the first few episodes is the competition among the Face members for the center position of the band. And if you're into K-pop, the easiest comparison for the center position is probably like the visual. So basically it's a position that's awarded to the member who has the best looks, the most talent, and the most appeal amongst the fans. And while the band was being set up, Tamon-kun was appointed as the center position, but then in this competition, he loses it to Keito-kun. And this is where the mirroring comes in, because the competition for the center position is basically all of the boys fighting for the attention of the fans and the biggest spotlight from the fans. Meanwhile, on the flip side of that, the fans are all fighting for the attention of their oshi or their bias, which, as I said, perpetuates that parasocial relationship fantasy. And we see this throughout the show where thematically, right, the whole anime is about your A side and your B side, and the double-sided nature of the idols is reflected in the double-sided nature of the fangirls. And the best example of this is in episode 2 when Face are having their meet and greet. Two of the girls in the queue start fighting because one of them accidentally steps on a pair of shoes that the other one bought just for the meet and greet. Utage tries to step in and control the fight because she feels like it's disrespectful to Tamon-kun and all his hard work that he's put in up until this point, and all the girls end up getting aggressive and fighting with each other and get kicked out. They essentially all activate their own B-sides, which are aggressive rough women, which, based on their outfits and the roughness of their language, I think we can assume that they're meant to be like the 1970s and 80s girl gangs in Japan. And again, what's interesting about Japanese girl gangs? That according to Easy Sociology, because you know, we love an A-level throwback, that girl gangs in Japan have a very strict, or had a very strict code of conduct. And there was also a hierarchy that they had to follow. So that tells us that even in these fangirls' B-side personas, there is a very strict set of politics that they had to adhere to. And of course, that means every A-side has a B-side. So the question is, what's the danger of crossing that line and going from fantasy to reality? Well, the core underpinning of all of these politics, both of the fangirls and the group itself, is that the parasocial fantasy can never become a reality. Not only because the reality or B-side of each face member is so different from their projected fantasy, but also because that's what the system of being a fangirl needs to maintain its fuel. It's possible to argue that the only time the fantasy is dropped is when Utage is interacting with Gloomy Harakun, because that's when he can be his truest, socially anxious B-side self. Like, interestingly, also in episode 2, when Tamon-kun and Utage go shopping, Tamon-kun is struggling to do up a necklace and he turns into Gloomy Harakun. And in order to encourage him and make him feel better, Utage actually gets him to say Tamon-kun is actually a human rather than Tamon-kun is a god. But I'm going to make a potentially controversial point here and say that the only reason Utage likes Gloomy Harakun at all is just because it's a different side to the fantasy Tamon-kun that she already knows and loves. Because if we take a look at her interactions with Ori-kun as an immediate contrast to this, she does not find his actions endearing or charming at all. In fact, in response to him putting Tamon-kun down, and when he issues the challenge of her switching Oshis, she says, "I couldn't care less about people I dislike." Don't think it gets any clearer than that. Even without Ori-kun's challenge though, there is already so much at stake from Utage crossing that line from fantasy into reality with Tamon-kun. As Erin LeCount articulately points out in their video here, fangirls and young women in particular are literally the backbone of the music industry and are the reason why so many boy bands in particular are so profitable and successful.
And as they say, it can be a really genuine, human and beautiful thing to connect this way, because it's all about young girls talking to one another and using this to find their community. But if the A side of fangirl culture is friendship and camaraderie, then the B side is literally unaliving other fangirls because they crossed the line and went too far with your Oshi, as we saw at the start of the video. And if we return back to episode 2 with the meet and greet, this line is literally manifested as a bar that the fans cannot cross even when they're holding hands with their Oshi. And interestingly, Tamon-kun himself also knows what's at stake. In episode 1, when Gloomy Harakun is first introduced, in his anxiety-induced delusions, Gloomy Harakun is worried about being labeled as a traitor, and looking at the imagery of that, there is a jail behind him and he is being hung up like Jesus with chains on his wrists. And this is the darker B-side of fangirl politics in Tamon-kun's B-side. If you're a god, you can also be a martyr. And so I now want to discuss what this reveals to us about fangirl culture more broadly in real life. Now look, with all that being said, my intention is not to demonize fangirl culture. I think enough men do that through the lens of misogyny without a fellow brown fangirl doing that on the internet. But because I am a fangirl, one thing that was running through my mind throughout the whole time that I have been consuming this anime and the songs of Face is what obvious parallels Face has to BTS, and therefore obviously what it reveals about fangirl culture in real life. And funnily enough, I had a reel go viral about Tamon-kun's B-side. I don't know if you've seen it. And in the comments, so many people were talking about Face's comparison to BTS, and so many people were like, Face is so much better than BTS. But if we're all to accept that Tamon-kun's B-side is a rom-com anime, and you know, as with anime and as the genre goes, there is therefore an exaggerated portrayal of what it's like to be a fangirl and be in a boy band, then the immediate question I had after that was, why are so many of the songs so similar to BTS? Like, so similar. Like, I watched the music video for Face Off, right, which is a song about like rebelling against society, and I was like, this has exactly the same concept as No. From the black and white outfits, to the band being forced into a political regime that they didn't choose to be a part of, and to it being set in some kind of alternate dystopian setting where the lyrics are also all about fighting back. The parallels are so obvious. Supernova also reminds me so much of DNA. Both of the songs center around a core metaphor that furthers that parasocial relationship that we were talking about earlier. So the metaphor in DNA is about your relationship with BTS being like predestined in the same way that like DNA and genetics are. And in Supernova, it's pretty similar. It's about fate and finding each other amongst the countless stars and your relationship being like a supernova, this scientific event that is bound to happen. And Hanato Yume is just butterfly straight up. They're both slow songs that focus on the idea of like what would happen if the boy band member lost you in some capacity. And in the lyrics, both use natural imagery of like butterflies and flowers to convey this like fleeting nature of your relationship in almost exactly the same way. Additionally, there's a saying that ARMYs throw around a lot, which is that BTS will find you when you need them most, which basically means their positivity and their music and their lightness will help lift you up in a time when you really need them and you're down. And that's also exactly how Utage finds Face when she's going through a difficult time in middle school and she's feeling really lonely, and she sees Tamon-kun on TV and sees the band being formed through that audition reality show. And extending this back to our discussion where we talked about how the fans and the group often mirror one another, very interestingly, the BTS theorist in their Substack article says this: BTS are one of two. ARMY also factor into this saving and or transformative quality of the group. Being part of a fandom, being part of a community, provides fans with vital connections and meaningful interactions. Not only does BTS find people when they need them most, but so does ARMY. In fact, ARMY are quite often the reason why others find BTS in the first place. They also then go on to talk about how BTS's saving quality has saved a lot of ARMY's lives, and I remember growing up in the 2010s, there were a lot of emo boy bands that had the same sentiment about, you know, saving people from depression, etc. Tamon B-side doesn't necessarily show this in exactly the same way and in as dark of a way, but I think the head explosions that you see of the fangirls are representative of this intensity and life or death nature of fangirl culture. Like the politics, the dedication, the sense of hope and love that you can get from it all come through in this. And I think it's safe to say, as we've said, that all of these humorous elements are satire of real boy bands and fangirls alike. But if we look at the number of monthly listeners of Face on Spotify, a number that I had definitely contributed to, I just find it really hilarious and interesting that Face in real life has now become an emblem of something that it was trying to satirize. And again, the comments in my reel are absolute proof of this. And maybe it's just because, you know, the politics of being a fangirl is just a self-fulfilling prophecy. And going back to those parallels with BTS, and because, you know, boy bands can be so formulaic and there's an order to things, maybe it's just that it's really easy to get sucked into something that doesn't feel too far off from something you already know. Or maybe, as Alex West, the author of the Medium article Inside the Mind of a Fangirl, put it all the way back in 2018, fangirl culture doesn't need to make sense, but to see the passion in these girls' hearts. We can freeze frame on the mobbing and the obsessing, but taking a step back to see the true love in their hearts is where it will all click. There's a love for the band, a love for each other, and a love for the safe home they have forged together. And that, my friends, is fangirl culture in Tamon-kun's B-side, and in real life, beautifully summarized in one paragraph. If this has got you feeling nostalgic and in the mood for some more cultural commentary, you can watch my video here where I dissected 2016 and the 2016 trend and also dived a little bit into fangirl culture. Or if you want to go in the darker route, you can also watch my video about why the anime community has a POC representation problem here. And if you are a fangirl yourself, don't forget to subscribe, because I have got some amazing fangirl related content coming up in March with the BTS comeback. And as always, I hope you're having a lovely day, living your best nerdy and authentic life, and I will see you over there or next week in the next video. Bye!